Greetings, Empire Builders, and welcome to what is very likely episode 3 of Branding You Academy, a series of videos and most likely audio on what it takes to actually build an internet multimedia empire, specifically an expert business, if you will. My name is Jonathan Levy, and I am joined by my friend and mentor, Dr. Anthony Metivier. And in today's episode, we want to talk about this idea of done versus perfect. In the startup world, you've probably heard a lot of talk about done is better than perfect. You've heard of things like the MVP, the minimum viable product, and you've heard folks like LinkedIn's founder, Reid Hoffman, say if you've waited till you're not embarrassed of your product, you've waited too long. And at the same time, we talk about product quality, and obviously product quality is important with things like digital products and books where it's not as easy as rolling out a software update. So where do we stand on this? What is the right move? How perfect should your product be when you release it? And what are the value considerations here? Anthony, anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd just point out, Jonathan, you mentioned this is likely to be our third episode, and that's proof of what we're doing, which is we're just out there implementing. And one of the interesting things that comes to mind is Michael Hyatt. He said years ago that in today's world, everything is in beta. It's not like it used to be where, you wrote a book and it was going to be reprinted dozens of times. Now we can update things so easily and so readily. And even any mistakes that we make with what we're doing right now, post-production can pick up so much, and we may go back and post-produce this very, content initiative that we're doing right now. And so the best thing is to get it out there and roll. And I'd rather be embarrassed by something than go, oh, I wish I would have, done this sooner.
Yeah, I think my stance on it is this. I think you definitely want to get something out, especially here's the critical factor for me, right? And I'll adjust my mic here. If you don't have market validation, this is really where the rubber meets the road. If you don't have a mailing list, you don't have customers, you first need to fire bullets, not cannonballs. That's the whole idea behind the MVP, the minimum viable product, that done is better than perfect. Because what you're doing is really, you're figuring out exactly that. What is the minimum I can do to make a valuable product that is a good enough test as to whether people out there want to buy what I'm buying? And so it's ever so important when you're first starting out, especially, to put in the minimum amount of effort to create the best possible product you can, of course, but then to get that validation, because you're not going to get real answers from people. If you say, hey, would you buy this? They're going to say yes. The real answer is, hey, can I have your credit card?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's an interesting way to look at it, and a useful one, because so many people, they haven't done that validation, and they, for whatever reason, they don't get a first product done so that they can actually say, credit card, please, for this particular initiative that they have. And I think part of that problem is that so many people are lost in vanity metrics, which maybe is what gets them into considerations of, this doesn't look good enough. And then they're, going for perfect because they're worried about thumbs up and shares. And, for people who don't know that term, vanity metrics, it's just numbers that don't necessarily equal dollars or transactions. And yeah, they're nice, and they can be a good signal of the health of what's going on in your business, but they're not actual transactions at any point, really.
Absolutely. One thing I want to add to that as well is, we're not against creating high quality products, quite on the contrary. But the point is, the best way to create a high quality product is with real user feedback. Because if you sit there and you think, what do users want? You will get it wrong 100% of the time. Very, very few people, Henry Ford among them, can say, I'm going to just envision exactly what people want. And even those visionary people, they look around in the world around them and gain feedback. So what you want to do is get that product out there so that that becomes a vehicle for perfecting and improving your product. Now,
Right.
Again, I'll stress the minimum viable in viable, because people aren't going to give you useful feedback if you put out a total pile of shit. So you need to put out a product that's good enough that people understand you're serious, you're putting in a real effort to deliver value, and they want to help and they don't feel ripped off. And so, I mean, if you look at our first version of our Super Learner course, blanket taped on the wall, MacBook Pro internal microphone, not even an external microphone, MacBook Pro webcam, desk lamp with a yellow bag taped over it to make the light more soft. But the content was phenomenal, and I really invested in the content. And then even with that really investing, 2 years later, we came out with a new version based on thousands of little questions or pieces of feedback or concerns that people had. And the product was just so much better because of that than I could have ever made it. So it
Right.
is this iterative process. As you said, everything's in beta because it's so easy and valuable to get real user feedback as opposed to just try and get it right on your own.
So let me ask you then, and take you back to that room where you're just putting a bag over a light. What was it in your mind as a mental resource you could share with others that enabled you to just put aside, whatever desire there might have been to have the best professional lighting so that you could just get going and roll?
Yeah. Well, I think I would be lying if I denied the role of ignorance being bliss. I didn't know a lot about video production at that time. And I think the same is true about when I wrote my first book, did my first podcast. Like, I didn't know just how far behind I was in product quality, but I was being practical and pragmatic. I knew even just buying an external mic was going to cost $100, and I didn't know if I would make $100 out of this. And I've always, all the businesses that I've started successfully, if I think resource conservation, I seem to think more clearly and do a better job. Whereas if I think let's invest because this is going to be a huge business, I seem to be subject to sloppy thinking. So I was thinking to myself, I don't know if this is going to make any money. I don't know if this is going to be successful. Let me use what I already have at my disposal. In fact, I still have that desk lamp. I bought like a $20 desk lamp. It was the only purchase I made. And I think that was a big part of it is being smart and not frugal, but pragmatic and practical, but also realizing, you do the absolute best you can with the resources you have. So it was clear to me I wasn't going to go all the way to recording studio, professional lighting, professional sound, professional audio, but I also didn't just record, my laptop sitting on a table and recording me with whatever is in the background. Like I did the best that I could. I taped the blanket up against the wall. I added some light so I didn't look, like this, half completely kind of, and I stacked up a bunch of books and desks so the camera would at least be at eye level. And I did the best I could with the resources that I had. And that gave me the confidence to say, I'm not going to do any better than this unless I make significant investments.
Right. Yeah, I had a similar story. I mean, I remember starting the podcast in a very echoey room in Berlin. Anybody who knows Germany, they know these big rooms with huge ceilings and wooden floors. And I'll never forget interviewing Phil Chambers with a blanket over my head over the microphone. Wow. to somehow get rid of that echo. And I'm just like, the most ridiculous character, but I just used what I had. And, I think I've told you this story before where I didn't want to spend a single dollar on Aweber, and I had serious scarcity mindset. But when I finally got out of it, then it was like, oh, you need ScreenFlow for this? Well, I've got it. And so we get it. It's like the avocado thing. It's just get the tools, but you got to start somewhere. So, that's my
image. Absolutely right.
That's absolutely
right. And I would say, I'm all about reinvest in your business and everything like that, but I would say wait until you have that proof of concept. The minute where you start realizing like, okay, maybe I haven't sold 1,000 copies, but people out there actually want this, that's the time to invest. Until you have that proof of concept, like be scrappy. And I also will add, today is a lot easier than 7 years ago when I was starting out. And I think 10 years ago when you were starting out, like you can, I rented a studio in Berlin, actually. It was like 240 euros a day for everything I needed except the camera. And I'm sure they would have rented me a camera for another 50 euros, So you can do things on the cheap. I still don't know if I would until you have proof of concept or an audience. Now, if you're out there listening and you're a blogger and you already have a mailing list of 10,000 people, put up a poll. And if people say, yeah, we're interested in an online course, it's probably worth for you investing. Whereas if you're starting out and you have no list, no anything, the way that I was starting out, it's okay to be scrappy. It's 100% okay to be scrappy. And today also, I think the perception of crowdfunding is different. Like you can pre-sell a course. And I know a lot of people in Genius Network, Jason Fladlin advocates doing this, right? Pre-sell a course, charge people a couple $100, and then build it on the fly as you go along, right? As opposed to making them wait 6 months, like, okay, we get our first 20 orders, I'm going to build the first 10 lectures and invest. So there are novel ways to do this today, but I still would not recommend people go all out investing in, buying the cameras and the even though the equipment you and I are using is, I'm sure we'll do an episode on equipment, but this is an $80 microphone and a $100 camera. I'm not, because I'm having difficulty with the $3,000 camera,
Right.
and this works great as well.
Yeah, I mean, we are following that principle now. We don't have it exactly set up as would be ideal. It's not exactly even what we shot with Branding You Academy, but we are following that principle of just using what we've got to, find
Yeah.
those people that we want to reach and making it happen. And, just you reminding me of 10 years ago, 7 years ago, man, is it ever a lot easier these days. It's unbelievable. But by the same token, it's also a lot more noisy and crowded than it used to be. So one of the things that people can do is, maybe spend a little bit more time. How am I going to cut through all this noise? And
Right.
they have an advantage really of getting more help because it's so much noisier. And a lot of people just aren't seeing authenticity and requests for helping these things.
Right.
That
I
could
think
do you
it's
a lot of
also
good.
true, that content is king. Although context is God, content is king,
Yeah.
and the quality of your content is going to stand out a lot more than the quality of your video or audio. I mean, people are more forgiving of bad video than bad audio because they can't understand you if your audio is bad. So I always tell people the first thing you should invest in is a decent microphone. But at the end of the day, it's your content that is going to shine. Now, one of the reasons we thought to do this episode is your perceptions on this has changed over the years. I don't know if you want to tell the Derek Sivers story and how you've kind of changed your thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, I have. And, one wake up call that I had, and it'll happen to just about everybody, is you don't know who's going to read your stuff. And, I had read Derek Sivers when I was just starting out, and it was hugely influential on me and really inspirational. All I had really was Derek Sivers and the I Love Marketing podcast. And that was what got me started. And so a couple of years later, I read a review on his blog of my book, How to Learn and Memorize French Vocabulary. And he's pointing out some of these flaws that are there. And, I just owned them. I thanked him for pointing that out. And then I got busy doing the second edition, which I think you saw the second edition at Genius not too long ago. And, it's still not the perfect book, but it is light years ahead of that first edition that he was kind enough to just speak honestly about. But it woke me up because I'm like, wow, one of my heroes has actually reviewed my book. And so I've just been in touch with him recently, asking him if he would read my forthcoming book. And he's writing his own book. He said, well, I'll see what I can do to get a blurb for you. But, we've had a relationship all these years back and forth, and I've kept up to date with him and constantly remind him what a beautiful thing that was. Because my next forthcoming book, this has been through 3 developmental edits. We're going to the nth degree with all kinds of things. It's going to have something wrong with it, I'm sure. And I'm not trying to be a perfectionist, but I have gone through every possible maximal detail because of that wonderful gift that he gave me. And I hope everybody can hear how important that is.
Yes.
Because it truly is a gift to have that kind of feedback and hear it and understand you don't know who's going to get your stuff that could actually be a tremendous asset if they fell in love with it instead of writing it.
Well, and it comes back to what we said earlier, right? Is like you did your best on that first book, right?
Sure,
it's not like you cut corners, but until other people, especially other very smart people, read it, you need that feedback. So you got to get something out into their hands. And it reminds me as well, like I've redone a lot of our products. I redid the Super Learner course. I've redone the Speed Demon course completely. I just wrote another book around learning and memory. I'd already written a book around learning and memory. And And you and I were talking about why, why do this? The Super Learner course was still selling gangbusters. The Speed Demon course still selling gangbusters. I was still selling a ton of my book. They all had great reviews, not the perfect reviews that they did in the olden days, because people started to notice video quality more, as you said. But why do it? And ultimately, here's what I answered to you. And I think this is important for people to understand. You need to be in love with your customer and with your product, right? Don't be more in love with your product than your customer, but you need to believe in your product at the end of the day, right? Because you're out there pushing it. And I'm sure we'll do episodes on marketing and this mindset shift of, if you believe in your product and you believe that it can actually help people, then why wouldn't you market aggressively and push it? And because you're peddling the cure for cancer,
Right.
as a metaphor, of course.
Right.
And so every time that I've redone one of those products, it hasn't actually, I've redone it before it's gotten to a point where, the reviews start tanking and people start getting upset. It literally comes down to one day I look at it, and this from our branding every few months before we do an email promotion, I'll ask you, like, Anthony, do we still think this is the best product in the market? And from time to time, once every 6 to 12 months, I'll actually go through the product, and then I'll comfort myself and be like, yeah, this is actually really damn good. We just need to fix this.
Yeah.
The reason I do that is pretty much a selfish reason, right? I want to be absolutely confident in my product and proud enough so that I can go out and push it really, really hard. And if you don't feel that, then it will show up in the way you talk about the product. It'll show up in the way you write about the product. It'll show up in the way you sell the product. And so my goal is to always be incredibly proud of my products and believe in them. Because first off, how can you sleep at night if you don't believe in your products? I think it's really hard if you have some ethical stance. But also, if you're proud of your products, that means that you've done everything we've mentioned before. Because the minute people start criticizing your product, you were no longer confident in it. You were no longer proud of it. And so you needed to get right with yourself around that feedback. And that's a good metric for me. I think we need to love our customers enough to only sell them products we would use and that we're deeply passionate about.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great thing. And, it's something I work on a lot, and I don't know if I do it the right way, but I find myself in sometimes traps. I do buyer calls often, right? And I always ask them, what should I change here? What should I improve? And the people who do the best with it, they say, don't change anything, right? And then, people who do less, let's say, they're just kind of, well, they say, and I've used this very much, they say, couldn't you just spoon feed it to us? And so that's just turned into not a revision of the product, because I don't want to damage something. I don't want to break something that's working so well and produces like a national memory champion and all these language learning stories and so forth. But I've then iterated different versions, which has then actually helped people get into the results that I'm creating from that other thing. So it's kind of, it's not necessarily a remaking, but it's also what bridges that you could make into.
Yeah, us too. We ended up doing a 5-day memory mastery challenge for people who were like, can't you just give me the spoon-fed version? I definitely find when it comes to customer feedback that there is a case of, Henry Ford saying, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And so we don't really look, we pay attention obviously to people's recommendations, but we don't pay attention as much as we do to their questions, because questions mean you didn't understand something. And so, if someone asks, what do you mean by this, more than 2 or 3 times, I'll redo the lecture. If someone, has a question where they say, am I doing this right? I will add an explanation that says, here's how to know that you're doing this right. And we've gotten to a point, I'd have to check with our customer service people, because I don't answer the customer service chats anymore, but we rarely get questions around our content anymore.
Really? Yeah.
And I think that that's just the result of years and years and years of revisions.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it, and something I can certainly improve on in terms of figuring out more of how to get those questions answered. I think one of the questions that I would come around to with this would be, what do you think is the role of us getting more training ourselves in terms of, becoming better at understanding the difference between the quote unquote wisdom of crowds through surveys of non-buyers and then this sort of feedback that you're mentioning? because,
Yeah.
you know, I've tried Ask Method before, and it took John Morrow, my mentor, to remind me. He's like, it's not for everybody, it's for your existing buyers. You know, it's like, take
Right.
the data from the existing buyers and be very careful with the wisdom of the crowd. So I see that as a ongoing education sort of exercise. So I'm curious what you think.
100%. I think what you need to be focused on it. And if you look at the smartest, best people in this content space, right? Folks like Ramit Sethi and Tim Ferriss and Ryan Levesque, what they're doing is they're just solving a need for their users and then figuring out what need that creates. Perfect
Mm,
example, Ramit Sethi, personal finance, I'll teach you to be rich, targeting people who want to make six figures. And then the next course is like, he does a bunch of other courses to get everyone to six figures. So if you're an entrepreneur, how do I get you to six figures? If you're a salary employee, how do I get you to six figures? And then his next course is like, okay, what do I do with the money to make my life better? That's a
right,
genius
right,
implementation.
right.
Or Tim Ferriss, right? Okay, let me help you free up your time so you work less and have more control of your time. Now, what do I do with all this free time? You improve your body, improve your health, be physically fit and healthy. Okay, now I've done that. What do I do next? Oh, well, learn new things. Okay, what do I
Mm,
do next? Now you're optimized. It's like you're solving the next problem and the next problem and the next problem. You're following your users. We're not as good at that, and we're trying to get a lot better at it. Uh, what figuring out what is that next issue for your client. That's what Ask Method is really about, right? It's,
right,
it's
right.
finding out that you need to know what problems they're solving
Right, right.
or trying to solve.
Yeah. I think it was Nelson Mandela who said, the first thing you'll see when you climb the mountain is all the other mountains left to climb, which is kind of
Totally.
an interesting for our topic because, you know, we both know Nelson Dellis, and
Hmm.
he told me something when I was interviewing him one time, that you want to keep the top of the mountain that you're climbing in mind, but don't forget just that next handhold in front of you, because you'll never
Hmm.
get to the top if you don't manage the steps in front of you. So when we think about this perfectionism or getting it perfect versus done, you
Yep.
know, you got to kind of have both things in mind. And then also that Nelson Mandela thing where there's still other mountains after you get to the top of this one. So think big,
Yes.
I guess is what they say.
I love it. A lot of smart Nelsons out there. So
Indeed.
anything else we want to add on this done versus perfect thing? I encourage people to play around with this and do some thought exercises around it.
I would just say we've got lots of those exercises in Branding You Academy, which is
Hmm.
at brandingyou.academy. And keep in mind that Michael Hyatt line that everything is in beta, and our own brandingyou.academy is in beta. And like you said, you revisit it and we revisit it and think, okay, what do we need to change here? And we want to know from you, you know, what questions you have so we can get them answered and, you know, constantly improve together, because I think this is the overarching mission that we have, is that there are empires to be built. You've got mountains to climb, and you've got missions to help other people help themselves. And, you know, we want to help as part of that and be better at helping you. So come and join us at brandingyou.academy.
Absolutely.